Hi folks, Dave, the Honest Audiophile. This is the Kinera Celest Phoenix Call, and these are my Honest Audiophile impressions. I want to thank Kinera Audio for providing the Phoenix Call for review. Greatly appreciate it, Kinera Audio. You rock. Alright, so the Kinera Celest Phoenix Call. This will set you back $130 from your bank account, and it is a triple driver hybrid. It has one dynamic driver, two balanced armatures, and two microplanar drivers or flat panel drivers or FPD. 32 ohms of impedance, 103 decibels of sensitivity, and a frequency response range of 20 Hz to 40 kilohertz. The Kinera Celest Phoenix Call comes in this purple box. Get some branding on the sides, some specs here on the back side. The front is magnetic, and you open it up and you get a little book type of display. You get this little medallion if you want to take it out. Get a bookmark type of thing also. And then you have a piece of paper which has some writing on it that I can't read. And then you have an area for the IEMs and a box of accessories. Now the accessories that you get are extremely limited, and you get a carrying case with a little bit of branding on it. It's hard shell, very small, typical. You open it up, get a area for your IEM to sit in a little pocket. Nothing too special here other than it's blue. And then you also get 2 bags of tips. You get 2 tips. You get the gray wide bore shallow tip, and then you get a olive grape shaped tip. The clear white tip makes the Phoenix Call sound more V-shaped. You get more elevation in the upper mids and treble regions, and then the wide bore tip kind of tames the upper mids and treble just a little bit, and you don't get quite as much bass. I preferred the gray wide bore tip. That's all the accessories that you get. You do get your Kinera Celest Phoenix Call. Now, aren't these things cool looking? You can get them in different colors. You can get them in a clear transparent, or you can get them in blue and magenta, pink, purple, whatever color that is. And so I really think that this design with the magenta and blue shells is really cool. Plus the cable matches. So you get this really cool faceplate that kind of changes depending on the lighting. And then the shells are kind of transparent. You can see in there. Now the pictures I saw online of the clear ones, you can really see on the inside. So if you like to see all the innards, get the clear ones. If not, get this design, which I think is really cool. Connects with a 2-pin. You do have a rather short nozzle and a slight angle with a flat, smooth back. They are a little bit on the thick side as well. The cable has decent ear hooks. They're fairly aggressive, but not annoyingly aggressive. You have a nice big split with a slider that does work and stays in place nicely. And then it terminates into a 3.5. The Phoenix Calls are fairly light. They're not super heavy, and I actually found them to be rather comfortable using the wide bore tip. I found that if I used the white tip, they didn't fit me as well and they were not as comfortable. And the reason for that is with the wide bore tip, I'm able to kind of mash them in a little bit farther and they snug in. Whereas with the white tips, they kind of stuck out a little bit and they wobbled around. Whereas with the wide bore tip, they just went in and disappeared and didn't move around. Isolation of outside noises is pretty good, probably somewhere 65% or so of outside noises being blocked. Around the neighborhood, you're going to hear louder vehicles, but Most other things you won't hear. You will have to take them out, at least one of them, to carry on a conversation with somebody, or else they will have a very muffled voice and be hard to understand. Around the house, louder things like coffee grinders and vacuum cleaners were able to be kind of heard, but were muffled. Comfort wise, I was able to wear them for several hours without any problem whatsoever, and then a couple minute break and pop them back in and resume listening. The Kinera Celest Phoenix Call is okay to drive. It's not the easiest one, being 32 ohm, 103 decibels, but most dongles should power it fairly well. I did find that they are slightly picky when it comes to the source's presentation. If it's a little bit on the warm side, it helped the upper mids and treble region not be quite as aggressive and added in a little bit of body, but it kind of bloated up the lower mids and the bass region a little bit. So going to a more neutral analytical source helped the bass not be as bloated, but it brought out some intensity in the upper mids and treble. So something kind of in the middle that doesn't have an overly warm sound signature and isn't super cold, brittle, analytical leaning was more preferred. Anything worked for me dongle wise for the most part. The only ones that were a little bit painful to listen to was the Hibby FC3 and there were a couple of bassy ones that were brought out the bass. Next Drive Spectra X and also the Heidi's XO were a little too bassy warm. Everything else kind of in between was fine. So overall, the Kinera Celest Phoenix Call are nicely built, fairly easy to drive. How do they sound? Well, they have very much a V-shaped signature that has elevated mids, lower treble, and big bass. Speaking of the bass is rather mid-bass heavy. It has sub-bass extension, but the mid-bass takes the dominant feature of the bass. It is a hard hitting, and there's a lot of punch, there's a lot of slam, a lot of kick to it, and there's just a lot of wallop when it comes to the mid bass. Sub bass, you'll get some rumble and grumble and a little bit of there, but the mid bass definitely is the show. Upper bass also is a little bit prominent. It does bleed slightly into the lower mids, just a little bit, but not too bad. Overall, the bass has a nice tone and timbre to it, and it definitely has a fun factor, and it's going to keep your toes tapping. It's very engaging. It stays fairly well controlled for the most part. On busier, heavier hitting bassy tracks, it got a little bit muddled and confused, but for the most part, it's pretty well detailed and resolving. The mids are slightly recessed throughout, and they have a little bit thin note weight to them. The mids are a little bit warmer on the lower mids, even though they're further back in the mix, but they have a little bit of warmth coming from the bass bleed. And then the upper mids are slightly colder and cooler in presentation, and they're more elevated, and they're a little bit closer. And so the mids are a little bit off-putting. They are a little uncohesive and uneven sounding. The upper mids are very vivid. They have a lot of clarity to them, and they're bright leaning, and at times can be a little bit shouty, aggressive, and intense. The tonality of the mids is better in the lower mids as it has a little bit more natural warmth, and the upper mids are a little bit too thin and lean sounding and a little bit unnatural in its tone and timbre. The treble. The lower treble has that brightness and that hotness like the upper mids have, and they're a little bit too excited and a little too high energy. And then as you go through the mids, there's nice extension and good air and space. And overall, the mids struggle like the the treble struggles like the mids do, with that they're a little bit on the thin side, a little bit on the wispy side, and they can be slightly unnatural. The stage of the Phoenix Call is average width. You get a decent representation of size, whether it's small, medium, or large. It doesn't really go into the grand size of things, but it does a decent job of portraying whether or not it's a small stage or a large stage or something in between. It also does fairly good with depth, except for on busier tracks, it'll get a little bit muddled and confused. And then layering does a good job of keeping things separate and placing them in front and back of each other. You can kind of space things out, and it does a good job with its layering. Imaging is decent. You can track things across the stage. There's no jitters or stutters or anything of the sort. And then it does a pretty good job with placement, even though it's not the most accurate and precise. You definitely know it's over on the right side, it's over on the left side, that's in the middle. Oh, that's kind of somewhere in between, but it's not pinpoint accurate. You can definitely track things across as they move. Detail retrieval is pretty good. It's about average at the price point of about $130. You're not going to be disappointed. You're not going to miss anything, but you're really not going to be exploring new stuff in your music. And then the resolution is kind of mediocre. It's not super great, especially in the upper mids and lower treble regions. It's a little bit harsh and a little bit glassy and glary at times. Tone and timbre. I found that the bass tone and timbre is pretty good. Sounds pretty natural. Instruments are going to sound pretty good. Once you get into the main mids, upper mids, and treble regions, things become a little bit of a hodgepodge of good and bad. At times they're too elevated and a little pushed, and instruments will sound a little metallic and can sound a little bit off. And then at other times they can sound pretty decent. It depends on what kind of music you're listening to, and it has a bit of an unnaturalism throughout. Nothing really sounds completely reproduced correctly, but the bass is more towards being correct than the mids and the treble. I did find that the Phoenix Call is very much genre picky. It is also source picky. And if you're listening to pop, EDM, dance, modern rock, and tracks, soul, R&B, things like that, it's going to be okay. But if you start listening to more classical, jazz, acoustical types of music, it's not going to sound as pleasurable and as good, and it's going to be a little bit off-putting. And then it also depends on the source. Some sources did better with the tone and timbre than others. How does the Kinera Celest Phoenix Call compare to a couple other IEMs? Now, I didn't have an IEM specifically that has the exact same configuration, but I have one that's similar, but it is more expensive. And that is the TRI i3 Pro. Now, the TRI i3 Pro definitely has more sub bass, and it also has a little bit better controlled bass. I found that the TRI i3 Pro is a little bit better controlled throughout the bass, does not bleed as much into the lower mids. It has a little bit more of a power and authority than the Kinera Celest Phoenix Call does, and on busier tracks it's a little bit better controlled, doesn't get as muddled and confused. Details and retrieval and resolution are slightly better also on the i3 Pro when it comes to the bass. The mids of the i3 Pro are a little bit warmer, have a little bit more fullness to them, and aren't as aggressive in the upper mids as they are on the Celeste. And then the treble is a little bit better controlled on the i3 Pro, but it still has a little bit of that unnaturalism to it, and it can be slightly darker sounding in the uppers. Soundstage wise, the i3 Pro is a little bit wider and does a little bit better of showing grained sizes. It's about the same on depth, layering, and also with imaging it is a little bit more precise, but it's still kind of in the neighborhood. Another IEM that is slightly cheaper but is not of the same configuration, it only has one dynamic and one BA, is the TRI Meteor. Now the TRI Meteor is a completely different presentation, even though it is more bassy, or is a bassy IEM. It's not more bassy than either of the i3 Pro or the Phoenix Call. It doesn't have near the the impact and the slam and the power and just the amount and quantity of bass, but it has better quality in my opinion. It's extended into the sub bass well, and it's just better controlled and more overall better resolving. And even though it doesn't have as much detail retrieval as either one of the two, the bass just sounds more accurate in natural tone and timbre. The mids have more fullness to them, a little bit more warmth, and have a little bit more natural, accurate tone and timbre, and are not near as elevated as both the i3 Pro or the Phoenix Call. And then the treble is just more pleasurable. It is a little bit more on the laid back side and does not have as much shimmery energy as the Phoenix Call. Soundstage wise, it's about the same width as the Phoenix Call, but it does a better job with its imaging. It's more precise and accurate and has better depth and layering capabilities. Detail retrieval is not quite as good on the Meteor as it is on the Phoenix Call or the i3 Pro, but it is better resolving, especially in the upper mids and treble, in my opinion. And I actually prefer the Meteor over both of those. So, the Phoenix Call. It's a V-shaped signature. It definitely has big, heavy hitting bass, and it has a lot of elevation in the mids and in the treble. And it can be an intense listen and can be shouty. At times, it's a little bit on the bright and hot side. It's very genre picky, it's very source picky, and unfortunately, the Phoenix Call it's just not for me. It's been Dave, the Honest Audiophile. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video. Speaking of next video, somewhere on screen, subscription links, notification bells. If you haven't already, please check those off. Don't forget to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to the video, and check out all the links down below. There's all kinds of information down there regarding how you can contact channel, follow channel, support channel. Speaking of supporting channel, I want to thank my supporters through Patreon and YouTube memberships. Thank you very much for all that you provide to the channel. It is much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting the channel, there's all kinds of ways that you can do that through one-time gifts with PayPal and Venmo, or through monthly subscriptions with Patreon and YouTube memberships, in which you can get benefits of private Discord servers and other things like early access to videos and all sorts of other things. So check out the links down below if you're interested in supporting the channel. It'd be much appreciated. Also, don't forget to check out the links down below. There's all kinds of other information on there, like gear recommendations and gear rankings and all kinds of other things. And then lastly, don't forget to enjoy the music, and that honesty is the best policy.